1, 2, there we go. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Earp Fiction edition of Fanfic Panel. How's everybody doing today? I am your host, Dark Wiccan. Unfortunately, my co-host is not with me today, so I decided to fill in the void with a bunch of panelists, and I hope you will help me welcome them right now. We have Newt, also known as Aylesford, coming to the stage. We've got Love is Gravity. We've got Hot Doc, also known as Lost Muse, also known as Meredith, one of the famous Merediths. And last but not least, what remains is our fantastic Hotbreaker, Nick. Go ahead, have a seat, guys. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's so funny, yesterday, Melanie kept using the word esoteric, and she was using it kind of incorrectly. But really, fan fiction is esoteric because it's something that only a select people know a lot about, and it's kind of niche-y. And that is, it's really great that as the podcast has attempted, fan fiction is becoming a bit more mainstream and becoming part of the popular fandom narrative. So as I start off this panel today, I have a question for the entire group, and that is, how do you feel the rise of fan fiction in fandom culture has helped to drive representation in mainstream media? Thank you. I worked very hard on that question.
This is the one I have to talk close to, right?
Yeah, lean in.
With regards to how fan fiction has influenced mainstream media, I mean, I think we're all somewhat aware that media folk, TV writers, film writers, whatnot, aren't necessarily allowed to read fan fiction for liability reasons. But I think just the mere fact of existing has influenced, because, you think, okay, well, there are these authors, creating queer characters and putting forth this representation, so why can't I see that? I think that was very much how I saw it starting. And then I think now at this point, we see these complex characters that, we say, okay, well, now we have representation sort of-ish, but can we make those characters actually real and three-dimensional and much more representative of actual experiences rather than just, the sidekick gay on the one episode of the season?
Well, I know for me, I'm sort of new to the fan fiction world, but what I have found is an outlet and an avenue for expression. And when I was first coming out, the internet basically didn't really exist. And so that wasn't an avenue, that wasn't a place where I could look to for community or representation or anything. And so I found myself reading queer fiction and hating it because all the storylines were horrible. Like, they would end terribly, and they would, if they survived at all, if the queer characters survived at all, they were going crazy and ending up alone and sad. And so I quit reading queer fiction because it was too depressing. I was like, how can we not, we're writing for ourselves, how can we not come up with better endings, better, hope for ourselves? And so that's actually what drew me into the fan fiction, is that you see this hope, this, this whole new world of a vision of futures for ourselves that aren't in mainstream media. And we're creating that, and we're making that, and driving that forward, and showing, hey, you know what? These are great stories. These are great expressions, and that's really important. And so I think it is really important. I think that's, where fan fiction has a lot of its strength.
Well, when I came out later in life, and part of that helped me was reading fan fiction. I was like, well, let me read this a little bit. Let's see what's going on. And then, I was like, wow, this is touching me. That's weird. Sorry.
Well, it could be, depending on the rating, but yeah.
Of course, I'm the inappropriate one. That's all right.
That's a new fan fiction.
But so, it showed me, it helped bring me into realizing who I am, and reading different fan fictions. And I think that helps the readers, you know, it helps see people like themselves. There's even, so that helped me come out. And then even reading some of the fan fiction in the Winona Earp fandom, I know I was Dread Pirate Brown. I was fangirling, fanboying all day long last night because I just, like reading his fiction, you know, having a trans character, it's just, you know, it's touching me, and I think it helps people when they're reading it, and that drives representation in the rest of it because people see, oh, look, you know, there are people that are feeling comfortable with who they are, and, you know, they're coming into their, and they need to be represented. I think it drives it in the media because people are becoming more and more sure of who they are because they see themselves, and that helps drive it in the media.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to set the setting, the year is like 1995 or something. And I started off reading like Sailor Moon fan fiction, and it wasn't anything that I knew existed. And I was like, oh, just clicking around on the internet. What is a lemon fic? I don't know. Let's click on that. Hello. And then it was like I went into like Xenofic, and then Xena was like the first like show that I've ever seen like publicly recognized fanfic writers and like not to sue them. So I don't know if you guys ever read Xena fanfic, but there's an author named Missy Good, and they actually invited her to write episodes of the show, and I was like, that can happen? And then like fast forward years, I don't know if you guys saw Twilight. So fanfic is like very so slowly becoming like creeping into the media, and I mean, look at you guys are all here just to hear us talk about fanfic, so it's definitely affecting everyone. So,
and yeah, as you've all said, you're able to reach a level of representation in fan fiction that we are not yet seeing in popular media. It's slowly creeping forward, but we still have a long ways to go. And something that is an element of fan fiction is, of course, writing based on canon stories. And when you don't have representation of someone who looks like you, that can make it more difficult to come up with you know, your vision of that world. So Newt, if you don't mind if I ask you, do you ever get frustrated that there aren't more queer people of color pairings in popular media to draw from?
I mean, the simple answer is yes, of course. A little bit more complicated than that, just from my own personal experience. But, I mean, it's hard to say just because I am still in the boat of any representation, as long as we're not killing them off the next episode, is good representation, because the more people see and the more it's normalized to have queer characters in television show and popular media is important. I think progressing forward with more POC is most definitely important. I didn't necessarily grow up Asian, grew up in a white family in Midwest, and so I don't necessarily have that sort of racial connection as a POC. So I think for me it's a little weird there. But I know from my friends in the queer community, just being able to see themselves, as with any of us, being able to see ourselves represented is so important. And I think that's where a lot of times we end up building these original characters into our canon shows. I mean, Winona Earp, we have Jeremy, but it is one of those things where you end up with a little bit more, I think, self-insertion when it comes to not having those characters already present.
Yeah, and we see that self-insertion happening in other ways as well. But before I kind of dive into that a little more deeply, I have another question for the group. And this is, it was inspired a little bit by a television show that is now finished and completed, that had a lot of money thrown at it. And for some reason they couldn't do a CGI wolf in 2 episodes, but is a plot twist for shock value ever alone, just alone, ever justified in storytelling?
Is this a call out?
I don't know. I didn't say any specific names.
Well, I would say it depends on if Monty Python is doing it. that might be about the only time I think I could justify a complete shock for no other reason, But no, because I think that the beauty of the stories that we're telling are the actual story, and it has an arc, it has thought put into it, a plot, and even if it's a one-shot or a smut fic or something, like there's a world that you've built, you're creating it, and to just sort of make a left turn for absolutely no reason that has nothing to do with the plot, I think it sort of detracts. But if you're writing, if you are Monty Python, then it works.
I mean, if you're writing, you want to do that. I mean, it's your story. But I mean, as a reader, it takes you out of the story. So, I don't think I can tell someone, like, that was dumb. Like, don't do that. Like, you can do what you want. It's your story. It's your creation. It just, as a reader, while you're reading it, you're going to get taken out. And you're like, okay, now, why am I reading this? What happened here? I don't know. And so, I mean, I can't say it's not justified because, like I said, it's your work, and you can do with it whatever you want to do with it.
Yeah, it's definitely harder to translate those into writing and not having a purpose for it. I mean, you can do it in like TV. I mean, I don't know if you guys watch The Perfection, but plot twists for the sake of plot twists don't really make a lot of sense when they're in fic. So.
I mean, if I may add to that, I like to screw with my readers as much as anybody else. That doesn't necessarily mean, I think, especially as fanfic authors, we become so attached to these worlds that we build and the characters that we make our own. And I think again, you can do what you want, but honestly, I don't think any of us would actually want to do that. We become so attached to these worlds. And I think to just do something for the sake of shock and awe is just, I can't imagine at least a fic author who takes pride in their writing.
I did want to add something. Sometimes it's not, like when you're writing a fic, it's not meant to be without, out of nowhere, because in your head, like you're spending like months and months and months writing these fics, and if someone's reading it and it's like an hour. So in your head, you'd had planned this ahead of time, like for like 4 months, and then when you write it and they read it, they're like, well, that came out of nowhere. So sometimes it's not really on purpose.
And sometimes you are writing and it takes you a while to update and you forgot what you wrote.
I feel like that's calling me out.
Well, something I think is so fantastic about fan fiction is the fact that fanfic authors generally really are deep diving into the characters and what drives the characters, getting into those individual sort of notions that push each character to make the choices that they make, and it just sort of builds up over time, and the more we get to know these characters through the writing and through the exploration, the more we can see when they're faced with a crossroads, which way they're likely to go. So I think that when you shortcut that and force a plot to drive your characters rather than letting your characters drive your characters, that's when you get into trouble, especially with readers or viewers. I don't know. Meredith, jumping back into representation a bit more, in your current work, In Search of a Family, your Nicole is both mildly disabled and a former Marine. So what inspired you to these two groups of representation?
So if you ever see me walking around, you notice I wear a big brace on my knee. I messed up both my knees when I was in the Navy. There are some fic writers who do amazing research, and then there's people like me who are like, I'm going to write what I know. And what I know is, I'm sorry, the other Merediths are being weird. But so I tend to write what I know, and I am a veteran who is disabled, and I was talking about this last night with some authors. Sometimes I worry because I don't want somebody to think that I represent every disabled person out there. I write my characters because that's what I know. So my Nicole is dealing with a disability. As a veteran, it is very hard to go from this person who, you're out there, you're doing the obstacle courses, or you're running around, or you're, sleeping in tents, or I was on a ship, I didn't sleep in tents. But, any of that, like going from that where you're such a physical person, such a, strong person, and then to have something happens to you and you have a disability and it takes you out of that, and dealing with that is hard. Going from up here, and now it's, I can't run. I used to run miles and I can't run anymore. It's hard to deal with, and I wanted, my Nicole to be, especially as a Marine. I wasn't a Marine, I was in the Navy, but as a Marine, that's even more physical. And I wanted the Nicole I was writing to have these, deal with this, where she was a physical person. She was, on the ground, she was doing things, and now she's having issues with that and dealing with that mentally, as well as, dealing with what people see of her. That's a hard thing too. I've had that conversation with people like, hey, I'm disabled. I'm gonna wear this knee brace most of my life, and I can't run around, and you worry whether your partner will be okay with that and, love you still and be with you. And I've had those conversations, and it's hard. And I think, I wanted to write my Nicole going through that kind of thing. So.
You wanted to see yourself represented in a story, which is what we can do in fan fiction. I don't know why I did an evil laugh. Ignore that. Anyway, so for the group, so Meredith, cut it out. Meredith, stop it. Meredith. Okay.
Meredith.
You're all on notice. Okay, so for all of you, what is the most important thing that writing fan fiction has taught you in any way, whether about the writing process or yourself personally or anything like that? We'll start at that end. So Nick, you're up first.
Oh no, wait, hold on. I was like, great, I've got like 3 people before I think of the answer.
Keeping you on your toes.
Let's see. I've definitely learned how to write better, but I also learned when you're writing it, you're kind of experiencing it along with the characters. And I've learned that writing a panic attack can definitely trigger a panic attack. And it's like you get so emotionally connected to these things, and I never really learned that you can be that emotionally invested in characters that don't really exist. In some ways, you can get more attached to them than people in real life. So it's been a weird journey, but yeah, that's it. There are a lot of things, but I can't really think of them because I'm a slacker. So.
Not in your writing, though. Your writing is definitely not slacking.
Yeah, because it's been like 6 months for one, and
for me, I guess it's, I grew up and my older sister is the writer of the family, and everybody in my family's like, oh, she's gonna write a novel, and she doesn't do any of that. She watches her phone. I don't know what she does. She brews beer. But I was always told I'm not a good writer. Let my sister's name is Lindsay. Let Lindsay, read over your stuff because she's the writer, and so through fan fiction, I was like, well, I'm putting out there. If somebody doesn't like it, they don't know who I am. Now y'all do. Ooh. But so when I first started writing, it was just a way for me, because I wanted to write, but I was afraid I wasn't, any good, because I'd been told I wasn't any good. I wasn't the writer. But so it helps me. It helped me learn that, hey, I can write if I want to. It's people will read it, and some won't like it, and that's cool with me. And I like Nick said, I've learned to be a better writer. Sometimes I like the negative comments and things because I'm like, oh, well, I won't do that again. Not all of them, because some of y'all negative commenters.
Don't leave negative comments.
But, I've learned, not to use certain phrases or not to say, certain tenses of words. So, that's helped.
Well, for me, I think what I've gained is courage. I'm writing the stories that I wish I had to read when I was younger. I'm writing the stories that feel like they're really important to me. And even when I first started writing my first story, Weha Cute Meat, I really didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And I didn't think anybody was going to read it. I was like, I'm just going to put this out there because for me, it was fun. It was fun to write. It was fun to think of it. And so I did it. And then I realized there were a lot of people who were reading it and were interested in where this was going. And I realized that, the stories that I want to tell are stories that other people want to read. And, the things that I'm interested in are things that you guys are interested in. And the characters that I'm creating are characters that you're interested in reading about. And it was kind of eye-opening to me because, you feel, when you're writing, it's a very introverted, very, isolated event. When you're writing it, you're very sort of singled out and, or not, you're sort of hidden away, not singled out. And so you don't see that connection until you start getting those comments and the hits and the kudos, and then you realize that, actually it is reaching people. And so for me, it's just having courage to actually keep putting those stories out there. And so I would say, for any writers out there, take that first step because I think you'll be really surprised. The stories that you want to tell, other people want to read. So.
Can we pretend I answered that? Like with that answer, that was mine.
I'm just making sure there are no mini tiny ears. I've been writing fan fiction for 15 plus years now. And I think throughout that time, what I've learned and taken from it is give no fucks. You're writing for yourself. It's nice to write for other people. It's nice to get the kudos in the comments. It's nice to have that recognition. But over time, I guess I've reached a point where I'm far more comfortable with, I can write things, I'd never have to post them. I have these stories in my head. And it's okay, you don't have to share them. You are not obligated to share them with anybody. And I think that's one of the most important things I think any writer, fanfic, or general writing can take away is that first and foremost, you're writing for yourself. It shouldn't feel like a job. It's something that you're doing for you. And I think over time, it's possible that we become so, I don't want to say obsessed, but obsessed with, being fed from our readers with those comments and kudos and hits and bookmarks and any sort of metric to sort of quantify the response from the fandom. And I think we start to lose sight sometimes of why we're actually doing what we're doing. And yes, it is to share stories, but there are stories to begin with. So.
Absolutely, and there are so many stories to tell, and something that I think we run into a little bit when we have representation in media, popular media, and it is getting better, very slowly, but it is getting better, is we have to walk this kind of line of, well, we want the queer representation, but we don't need that character for it to just be all about them being queer. That should just be an aspect of their character, but they have a full, rounded life beyond that. And sometimes and oftentimes, because our characters are typically secondary or tertiary characters, we lose the representation of the queer experience, not the negative stuff, because we've had plenty of negative tropey stuff to last many, many lifetimes, but just the experience of being a queer person in the world and relating to the straight world. We don't see that as much in popular media, and that's something that fan fiction is able to explore because we have the time. We have the time in these stories that we're telling to be able to share part of that queer experience. And the queer experience is evolving constantly and changing as things do continue to get better. The experience of young queer people is better now than it was for those of us in the 90s, or in the 80s, or the 70s and 60s and going back. So, speaking of the experience of being queer and young in the 90s, Robin, In your current work, Then and Again, you deal a lot with gender realignment therapy. Is this as difficult to write as it is for some of us to read?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I actually was myself hospitalized for depression and had to go under gender realignment therapy for a gender identity disorder back in the 90s. But what I wanted to say about that is that this story is not my story. This is not autobiographical. And so Nicole's journey through Then and Again is not mine. And so it's like I'm writing what I know, but not about myself. And so that was really important for me, first, to give me the freedom to be able to write about it in the way that I felt like I needed to be able to write about it. Because if it was autobiographical, I think it would have been too difficult to write. But it gives me, the fiction aspect gives me the freedom and the flexibility to really dig deep and explore the themes in Then Again, and what is gender realignment therapy and how harmful it can be. And how do you navigate through that? Like, how do you find your power and your voice to rise above that? And so there were scenes that were really hard to write. I don't want to trigger warning for like gender realignment and all of that. But the hardest scene for me to write was the scene in which X, Dolls, is revealing that he had attempted suicide. And it was basically the first time that X was letting Nicole into his world and really sort of opening up to the whole group, but really to Nicole. And the tension in that room, I really wanted the room to feel the weight, like the gravity of what he was saying and how significant it was that he was revealing this. Because he's, in canon, we know he doesn't open up very much. And then I had Nicole immediately reciprocate afterwards and open up to him too by revealing that she's queer. And I think that was the moment where they kind of solidified their bro TP. That was, they were in it for forever at that point. And so that scene was really hard to write because I know I needed to get it right, and I needed the emotions, the weight of it to feel right. And that's hard to write. On the flip side, though, in the 2008s, the hardest scene for me to write actually was the breastfeeding scene.
Phenomenal scene, by the way. Just phenomenal.
And because it was basically Waverly letting Nicole almost into her family. Really, it was just this special moment. And I was building it up, and Nicole, this is all from Nicole's point of view, and I wanted it to be sort of from Nicole's, like, oh, this is kind of titillating, we're talking about breastfeeding, but then when we actually get into the moment of breastfeeding, that I wanted it to be incredibly intimate, but in absolutely no way sexy. And so it was, again, I really struggled with how do I make this both intimate and yet not sexy at all. And because I thought that was so important for that scene, for that moment, that this was not about, being aroused in any way, that this was really it was like a family moment. It was this truly intimate, really beautiful, sweet moment for them. And it was where Waverly lets Nicole in to her life.
Well, I think you achieved it, like 5 stars. Yes, absolutely. If you haven't read Then and Again, read it. It is amazing. So Heartbreaker, I'm going to put you on the spot here. So you are known in your writing, or at least your writing of late, and especially in your writing with J Bear, of writing some pretty angsty scenarios for us to all rend our clothing over while we read along and sweat and cry. So are there times you feel that angst is unnecessary in storytelling?
I don't know what you're talking about. I was just writing a Christmas fic. Okay, I believe that fan fiction fills a hole for what's missing from canon. So when I first started actually publicizing, or publishing, there we go.
Yeah, got your back, no worries.
Today. When I first started publishing my fanfic for people to read, I was writing for the Orphan Black fandom, and if you've ever watched Orphan Black, there's nothing but angst on that show. So everything I wrote was light and fluffy and cute. You know, they're just going out on a date. You know, they may be being chased by Dyad or whatever, but they have this time for this cute little moment, you know, and that was most of my fic. And then I started watching Wynonna Earp, and okay, this is not to bash the show at all. I love Wynonna Earp, I love Way Hot, but they don't know how to have like any angst whatsoever on the show. Season 2, I mean, there was like that huge thing with like Rosita and like the lying, but by the end of the season, you know, they're like happy, cheerful, you know, kissing, and that's the last scene that we see of them. So, so in order to balance that, we have a tendency to add a little bit more of the angst. And Jay and I wrote Memories That Remain. I don't know if you've read it, but let me tell you how it started. I was like, Jay, I would really love to write a Mamma Mia fic. And if you've seen Mamma Mia, it's actually a light, cheerful, singing, you know, it's happiness. All wrapped up in a ball. Yeah. And then I was like, we can make a happy Christmas fic. And then it turned into, how do you translate Mamma Mia's plot to lesbians? There is no way that Nicole can accidentally impregnate her. I mean, they can try as many times as they want, but there is no way. So then we started like brainstorming, and Jay was like, JBear1701, by the way, if you don't know who it is, but was like, have you ever seen the L Word? Yes, I've seen the L Word. Well, there's Bet and Tina ends up getting like pregnant behind Bet's back, or like after she doesn't tell Bet that she's pregnant, basically, and they break up. So we kind of mashed all of those things together to like create this weird angsty thing, and the angst just kept pouring. It was like every single thing that happened, it was like, okay, there's no happy ending to this. So, I mean, angst is important. It does feel, but it's not necessarily required, and it's definitely dependent on the person reading it and the person writing it. Because there are different types of angst. You know, there's the angst of separation from your lover that you believe is your soulmate. But then there's also like internal angst, like Pour Me More. You know, like Pour Me More was definitely, I was going through a very depressed time when I started writing it, and it definitely came out in my writing. So maybe it's because I'm an angsty person right now.
Does it serve as more like of a catharsis in that instance?
Yeah, on some points it does, like writing out your feelings does, you know, relieve it, but it lets you relieve it through having to feel it all over again. So it's kind of like a catch-22 thing. Like, you don't want to be depressed, but being depressed at that moment kind of helps you work through it. That's not for everyone, of course, but it was for me. And it's like, you know, depression is definitely different for every single person. Like, I wrote a panic attack scene, and my girlfriend was like, that's not how I have a panic attack. I was like, well, that's how I have a panic attack, okay? So step back. So, to answer the question, no, it's not necessary, but it's wonderful. And
Fair, absolutely fair answer, yes.
And you do it really well.
Yes. So question for the group, and then after this, we'll get to audience questions. And yes, so what we'll do is in a moment, if you do have a question, please come line up to audience left over here, and we'll come down with the mic. And if you have a question for our panel, we can do it that way. But before we do that, what do you wish folks who don't read fan fiction or malign fan fiction would understand about it?
I'll go. We'll go a little crazy here. So if you ever watch like TV or something, like some shows, and it's always like that real nerdy dude is writing Star Trek fan fiction where Data and Captain Picard get together or something. I think I saw that on a TV show once.
I think I read that fiction.
But, you know, sometimes TV shows, anytime they mention fanfic, or it's, you know, Ben Wyatt is being nerdy and writing on Parks and Rec. And when I first started writing fanfic, I remember this, my sister was like, fanfic's weird. Only weirdos read that, you know? And I was like, oh. So then I was like, well, I want to read some. And then I want to write some. And that was years ago, probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And actually, it was funny because fast forward to a couple months ago, I was sitting there with my sister. It was actually on Mother's Day. We were sitting there, she was brewing beer, and we were talking, and she's like, oh yeah, I read fan fiction. I read the nastiest, dirty fan fiction, like stuff that Smug would write. That's what the stuff my sister's reading. It's like, and I'm like, oh, well, that's flipped, hasn't it? But I wish people who didn't read fan fiction, didn't know about fan fiction, like, could realize that this is not like what is just, you know, it's not just like nerdy guys in their basement writing Star Trek fan fiction. It's, you know, it's anyone. It's like has been said, it's for the stories that, you know, we want to hear, and it's just a whole different mix of people writing it, and there's a little something for everyone. It's not weird. It's, you know, maybe your sister's reading that nasty fan fiction, all the smut.
Is she single?
She is, and her dream is a doctor, so that's you.
I think the thing that I would want people who don't read fanfic to know is that fanfic is real fic. You know, it's as real as any book that you can buy from Amazon or at Borders, you know. Do Borders still exist?
No, I don't think it does.
Oh, okay, sorry. Barnes and Noble. But this is something that we do, you know, because we enjoy doing it. It's not something that we're getting paid for. We're not, you know, token. We're not getting paid by the word. I mean, we do it for free. We do it for you guys, you know. We do it for people who are, those kids that are like locked in their closet, you know, that can't come out in the light, you know. We do it for them. So I just wish people would know that.
Yeah, I totally want to second that. That was actually my answer, so thank you.
Glad I said it first.
No, seriously, because I really, it is just fiction. I mean, yes, there is like, you know, crazy, often poorly written, you know, little smutty one things, and, you know, it's like, you can imagine who was writing that. And it's not Smug. That's very quality stuff.
Smug has good smug.
Thank you. But it's fiction. These are real stories. I was blown away when I first started reading Winona Earp fan fiction that this is fiction. This really truly is. These are fantastic stories and important stories. And you know, I was diving into them and I couldn't get enough. And you know, when I chose to throw my hat into the ring, I was like, well, you know, how could I possibly compete with, you know, Boots and Cats, or you know, it's like Boots and Cats.
Every time.
You know, it's like, I feel like, you know, how could I possibly be worthy to throw my own hat? But you can. It's a wide open ring, and it's there for everybody. And that accessibility is wonderful. But this is real fiction. This is real work that we're putting into it. These are legitimate stories, and they deserve to be told. They deserve to be read. They deserve to be honored. And so, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I think as a corollary to Nick and Robin's answer, you know, it's fic authors are authors. I mean, we all kind of have these moments where they're like, oh, what do you write? I'm like, I'm a fan fiction author. But we write. You know, again, there are brilliant fucking fan fiction authors who, again, we were talking about this, that their stories could just be, you know, Joe Schmo fiction out there, and you don't need to know the source material. But regardless of the source material, if we're building upon those characters and we are putting that effort in, you know, we make this differentiation between, oh, I'm a fan fiction author, as somehow that is different or less than, you know, being an author, being a writer. And I think that is what I would love people to take away. Who don't read fan fiction or are less familiar or think it's, you know, weird or odd, that we put as much effort into writing as any paid author, perhaps more. because we aren't getting paid for it. But yeah, I mean, this is to, of course, other fanfic authors as well, that we are writers.
Absolutely, 100%. And that, yes, please, please, please. And that has been one of the main goals of the podcast, is to legitimize fan fiction so that when someone asks you, so what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a writer. They say, oh, what do you write? You don't go, fan fiction. You go, fan fiction, and I'm really good at it. Because it is legitimate fiction. Okay, do we have any questions for the panel? If we have any questions, please line up over here to house left, and we'll get a mic for you.
Taking your mic away, you don't get
So,
That's stealing my voice, Massimo.
so Nick, if you'll just share with Meredith.
we can share.
Okay, Smug, all right. I'm bracing myself.
So, hi. I'm Smug, and I just started writing
Humble brag.
fairly recently. And I find it really challenging, and for me, as a person, challenge is really exciting. It's something that I really go for. So I've been setting myself higher and higher and higher challenges. And there's still some challenges out there that I haven't felt empowered to address yet. I was wondering, for the panel, what are those challenges floating out there for you? Like, pick one. What's something that you really want to aspire to, but you don't necessarily, haven't really approached it yet? I'm just curious.
Finishing a multi-chapter fic.
Yeah.
For me, I like taking on weighty subjects and kind of throwing them around and making them real and making them very human. But there are subjects that I was actually very afraid to actually start publishing then and again, because I felt like it was really risky. Because I wasn't sure what the reaction was going to be to writing, Nicole character in a psychiatric hospital and going through that experience. But ultimately, I was like, for me, I needed to write that story. It was an important one to express. And so something that I would be afraid to write about, but I think would be really worthy if it was done well, would be approaching a sexual trauma. Because again, those stories are so important to tell. But it would have to be done right. And I'm not sure if I have the courage to start and take on that, but that would be something that I think would be a valuable addition to the ring. So.
The one thing, and I always go back and forth on this because I am afraid to do it, is to write a character, a non-binary character, using my own experience and stuff, and I'm frightened by it because my experiences are my experiences. I come from a whole different world than a lot of people do. And so I get worried about it because, like Robin said, I mean, you don't know how other people are going to take that. But all you can do is write your own, and then you worry that someone's reading it like, well, this is trash, and who would ever do this? And you're like, well, this must, I relate to this. That's why I'm writing it, and so I worry about that because I don't want to offend anyone, but it would be coming from my perspective, my journey, and so that would be the one.
All right, so I'm kind of working on one of my biggest issues right now, and it's writing a person of color. Looking at me, I am a very pale person. It's because I don't like the sun. I'm actually Filipino, Puerto Rican, and Irish, and so a lot of my life, it's been the stigma that I'm not dark enough to be able to experience, to fully understand the process or the experience. I don't know why I said process. Experience. So I'm writing an original fic, which the main character is a person of color and an elf, because the world needs more gay, dark-skinned elves, okay? But I am very insecure about it, so I have like a vast amount of friends that I keep sending it to, and I'm like, is this okay? Is this wrong? And I just have to constantly check, and they're like, dude, stop it. It's like, you can do this, but it's an issue for me because it's something that has been an insecurity of mine, so being like the palest person in my family. So I do think it's a hole that needs to be filled, and I'm just trying to.
That's what she said.
I think I said like the exact same thing last night at dinner, and like, it was the same reaction. Okay, yeah. So there are issues that need to be dealt with and addressed in media that aren't being like approached enough. So I'm trying to do that, but still dealing with my own insecurities at the same time. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
It's a great question. Awesome question. Oh, yeah, sure. So I have had a fic on the back burner for quite some time that I'm so inspired to write, but I'm afraid to write because it does embrace one of the most maligned and reasonably so hated tropes in queer writing, and that is the gay girl stealing a straight but not really straight girl away from her partner. So that's something that I'm toying with, but I just keep chickening out. I've written some key scenes, but every time I start to try to piece it all together, I get a little sweaty and my palms, I start getting nervous. I'm like, I don't want people to hate me. So so that for me is my biggest challenge right now.
Hi, I'm also a fan fiction writer. I actually have not written fandom at all. And I was wondering, I wanted to hear your thoughts about curation of your work, because one of the things that I found is my writing from when I started to where I am now has progressed a lot. And for instance, I have short stories where I didn't really capture the characters' voices really well. And yet there are people who like that fiction, and so I'm leaving it up there, but I am progressing as a writer, and I'm like, I'm not so proud of that anymore. So how do you make the decision to whether, do you keep all your works up? Do you sometimes take some of them down because you're just like, this doesn't represent who I am anymore, or what I want to say as an author? So if you could speak to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Well, I'll say real quick, yes, I have actually had several fics taken down from not AO3, but another board where I had past work posted because I just didn't think it reflected who I was as a writer now. I felt they were very kind of freshman effort, and it was like, I'm not going to say that I was ashamed of them, I'm not, but when I have far better work to support my so-called resume, you kind of want to take those first efforts and kind of go, okay, well, I'm going to shelve those. They're still a part of me. They're still a part of my writing journey, but they're for me now. They're not for everybody else.
I know personally that it's a great question. Thank you. I've actually thought about that too. Last year, my dad passed away, and for a while, I couldn't write. And so to get myself back into writing, I took on smut writing because it's fun, and it was not. I didn't have anything to do with death, so I needed that. But I would just like crank out these stories, and I think I have like 4 in the series, and like I would sit down for like a few hours, crank out this smutty story, very minimally proofread it, and throw it up there. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to see what happens because, I'm not expecting this to be great literature. You know, this is a writing exercise for me, and it was something that I needed to do to kind of get my juices flowing. So
Forward.
Yes. And I'm choosing to leave it up there, even though some of those stories really aren't well written. I mean, it was more just for me. But I also think it was important to show that you don't have to write everything really well. Like, things can, be poorly written and still be a fun story to read, and it's okay to leave that up there, and that's okay, and that's part of my progression as a writer, and sort of honoring that journey. I think it's okay to leave that up there, and I think it's okay that other people are reading it, and they don't have to like it. It's and they can say, well, I like that one, but so I've chosen to leave everything up, even though I don't necessarily like everything that I've written. So.
I'm kind of in the same camp as Robin. I mean, it's, for me, if I wrote it, it's part of the journey. I know, like I said, I get comments or talk to people, and things change. I fix things in my writing, and you progress as a writer. But those early things, that is part of my journey as a writer. And I mean, if someone reads that and says, well, this is trash, you can't write your way out of a paper bag, I'll be like, well, maybe check out some later stuff. It gets better. But I mean, I leave my stuff up because, maybe someone will enjoy it, and maybe someone will, want to connect with the Meredith of that time. And so I leave them up.
So, like I mentioned before, I was an Orphan Black writer. I don't know if you guys watched the show, but something really bad happened in the second season, and along the bury your gays, line, and I got so angry. I don't know if you believe in signs. I am a Pisces. I am normally very laid back, but when we get mad, we get really mad. So I was into scorched earth policy. I pulled everything off. Every single piece of fic that was related to Orphan Black, I took down off of AO3 and fanfic.net. If you look me up on fanfic.net, I think there's one Ruby fanfic. But then I got instant regret that, there were a lot of people who actually read my fic and who enjoyed it, and I felt really bad. So what I did was I ended up creating a website and putting it, loading it all onto a personal website. That way it's not contributing to the Orphan Black numbers whatsoever on AO3, but it's still out there because people were messaging me. They're like, hey, I was looking for your fanfic and I noticed it's not there, and it was, really helping me through this time. And I was like, dude, I'm sorry, but it's on ghostriverunicorn.com right now. So, and then I changed my name and I was writing as a different name. And so I did, want to have it still be out there, but, I only wanted it to be for people who already knew it, already knew me, So people, could freely message me. I could, freely give them the address, but for that, it was kind of a part of my life that I wanted to close the door on, and of course I did not post a few fics that were not finished that was really trash. So I guess I did bury a few of those, but for Winona Earp, it still has been a progression, and I don't think I would do the Scorched Earth thing ever again, but I'm unpredictable, but I don't plan on doing it. Trust me, I don't plan on doing it, but I don't recommend it because you do have instant regret. So just remember that once you pull it down, you pull down all of the comments, all of the responses that you gave to people. So there's that. So I say leave it up, just let the world experience it, even if it's not the best writing, or even if you think something that you're writing now is not the best writing, put it out there. You never know. There's someone who will like it,
You have time for one more question.
So first I want to say you guys are all really articulate. You sound like you're published authors on their 5th book tour. So
We're all faking it. None of this is real. It's all an act.
So I'm not super involved in the fan fiction world, but I'm curious as to how you sort of define fan fiction, because from what I do know, it's like basically character names, and that's kind of the only string. So, like, where do you draw that line in terms of, I'm just writing my own story at this point, I might as well go and write my own thing, versus like, no, it has this, I guess, DNA of the show?
I think as far as fan fiction goes, I mean, as a reader, I still want the essence of the world or the character, even if it's, it's Winona Earp and there are no revenants and monsters and whatnot. But the characters, as a show that was character-driven early on, it's capturing that. I mean, I think everybody knows that I'm a huge fan of the 80s mixtape AU. And I think Pirate and Smurf did such a great job of capturing the essence of Nicole and Winona and those relationships. And I think building upon that, I think that's still, we're still familiar with the characters. We're still familiar with those dynamics, and it's really fleshing that out. There are some authors who, just take the names and it doesn't seem like anything we know. And that's, quite all right. But again, I think, at least for us, we're writing fan fiction because we love the characters. If we want to be writing, our own fiction, we would be writing our own fiction with different names and not opening ourselves up to potential lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely when you're writing fan fiction versus an original fic, the characters are already developed. You don't have to do like the world building, because writing original fic is hard, dude. It's like you have to create these people from the bottom up. So when you're writing fan fiction, there's still that core soul of the person. It's not like they're interchangeable. You can't take Nicole Hott and say it's it's Dana Scully. They're different characters. Everybody knows that they're different characters, and they expect different things from them.
Nicole Hott is much taller.
I mean, they're both redheads, so you just replace a redhead with another. But I think that if you're a fan, if you're writing, it's fanfic. So, but with fan fiction, there's a little bit less restriction. So you don't have to explain who Nicole Hott is. You all know who Nicole Hott is, so.
Yeah, kind of like what Nick said. The characters, and I tend to write AUs. I like AUs. But the characters are still, they have some of their, basic thing. Nicole Hott, in mine, usually is in the military, because that's what I write, but that's along with like the police, and the Nicole's got that background, and Waverly's loving and caring and just super cheery. That's who Waverly is as a character. So you kind of take that, like Nick said, writing original world building and characters and all that, that's hard. That's and we're kind of have a little bit of that done for us when we write fanfic, and that makes it so that we can put out these stories. And sometimes you will read fanfic that maybe you're like, that's not our police officer Nicole Hott. Sometimes she's selling acid. It's but which is a great fic if you all ever. Yeah. But it's still Nicole Hott. There's still that solid foundation of Nicole Hott, and there's still that solid Waverly, and that's that kind of is what makes it fan fiction.
Yeah, I think to jump in real quick, because we do have to wrap up, I think what makes fan fiction and not original fiction is that your core characters are the characters. They are true to their identities as established in canon, and then you can sprinkle and add all of these new and different experiences onto them that will then maybe change their worldview a little bit, but at the core they're still themselves, and that's what makes it fan fiction and not original. Well, folks, thank you so much for coming out for this panel today. It is wonderful seeing the enthusiasm for fan fiction. I want to thank Hotbreaker, Meredith, Robin, and Newt. You've been fantastic panelists. We're going to stick around and hang out in here, answer any questions you may have. There are a lot of other authors in the audience as well if you have questions for them. In the meantime, read more fic.